I'm going to teach you how to master your ball striking with the irons through some really, really simple drills. And there's one kind of key thing that almost all golfers miss when they're working on ball striking. And at the end of the video, there's something which I think is really going to tie it all together, which I'd like you to do on the golf course. So we're going to use some really, really good players. We're going to use Adam Scott, we're going to use Tiger Woods as some reference points to use and see what they do. So I want you to have a look at where Adam Scott and Tiger Woods are at the top of their backswing and at impact. And we're using a couple of reference points. We're using where the ball is relative to them, and we're using where their lead shoulder is relative to that ball line. And what you'll see is that both those golfers, at the top of their backswing, have their lead shoulder behind the golf ball. Okay, we can see that with them both there. But as they get to impact, you'll notice that their lead shoulder, or the kind of tip of their lead shoulder, is significantly in front of the golf ball. By quite a bit. It's not 1 to 2 inches, it's a good 6, maybe 7 inches. Hard to measure on a video, but you can see that big difference. So the key to ball striking is where this lead shoulder is relative to the ball, and there's also relative to the ground. I'm going to teach you how to do that in this video. My golf club is working around my body on this big, big circle. We know that when we've got to hit balls solid with an iron, we need that low point to be target side of the ball. That's the first point. There is a second point which we'll come to in a moment. So where that lead shoulder is relative to the golf ball is basically going to control where your low point is relative to the ball. So if you're somebody who pops your swing onto video with your phone or whatever it may be, and as you're at impact, your lead shoulder is in line with the ball or even behind the ball, that's going to tell you, and that will tell me, that your low point is too far back. So kind of no matter how many balls you hit and how many practice sessions you have, you're going to struggle to really compress the ball like the best players do. So why would that shoulder be out of position? Well, for some golfers, it's simply that they drag it too far behind the ball going back. It becomes really hard to get it back. Other golfers will actually have it in a nice position, but they'll make the kind of wrong move on the way back. So we're going to first of all teach you the 2 movements that you need to control that lead shoulder, and then we're going to talk about that final point. Alignment stick through my belt. I'd love you to do this. It's a great little exercise, and if you can do this and get yourself opposite a reflection or mirror, that's going to be really, really valuable because you'll be able to see what I'm kind of demonstrating. So when we think about the shoulders and we want those to work correctly, we've actually got to think about what happens below them. And this will all kind of make sense as we go through this. So let me take my address, make my backswing, and you're going to see my lead shoulder gets pulled back behind the golf ball, just like we saw Adam Scott and Tiger Woods. Just comparing myself there to 2 of the world's best players ever. What I see really quite common is golfers trying to shift their weight. Now we know that should happen. We know that we should go onto our lead side. But watch what happens if I, just from here, think about kind of bumping or pushing my hips towards the target. What's going to happen is I'm going to get something like this, where you can see my hips shifted laterally, but my left hip went significantly higher than my right hip. And look what happened to my lead shoulder. It got forced up and back. So where is it relative to the golf ball? Well, it's not in the right place. It's certainly not where we saw Tigers and Adams. So from here, low point's going to be too far back. So here's what I'd love you to do. I'd love you to think about putting some pressure under your lead side. So don't think about bumping your weight, just think about putting pressure under your lead side. And as you do that, I want you to keep the lead side of the alignment stick, so your kind of left hip reference, lower than your trail hip. Let me show you what that would look like. So we pull the shoulder back behind the ball, and then I'm going to put pressure through that left foot, but keeping the lead side of the alignment stick lower. Now look how different that looks. My lead shoulder didn't get forced up and back. My head didn't get forced up and back. And obviously I'm nowhere near impact yet, but you can see already that looks very different. So I didn't think about bumping my hips. I actually felt, or I focused on putting pressure through this lead foot. Now actually, as we do this with a slightly more dynamic movement, you'll find it probably a little bit easier to feel because there'll be a little bit more flow there. But the key thing is, when we control what the hips do, we automatically control what the shoulders do. If you've ever seen your head go back or your head go up, that's what we see visually. But it's not the head going back or the head going up. It's what's happening through your legs, your hips, and your kind of torso that's creating that movement. And we often see the head and we think our head's moving and we focus on keeping our head still, but that's not the source of the problem. So as I keep that lead hip lower and move my weight, suddenly if I was to rehearse to impact now, where's my lead shoulder? In a much, much better position. What that's going to do is that's going to move my low point forwards. There is another piece to this puzzle. This is the bit that the majority of golfers miss when we're thinking about low points. Imagine if my low point was in front of the golf ball. We know it needs to be in front of the golf ball. So let's say it was kind of over here somewhere. So let's say the lowest part of my swing was some 2 to 3 inches in front of the ball. Would that be what we need for a good strike? Many of you would say yes. That's unfortunately the wrong answer. Because what would happen if my low point was in front of the ball, but it was 2 inches off the ground? So let's say my club comes down, its low point is target side of the ball, but I could still top it. So when we want to strike our irons well, there's two things we have to control. Our low point has to be target side of the ball, but it also has to be underground. We're never going to take a divot if our low point is target side of the ball, but it's 2 inches above the ground. So when we think of great ball striking, we have to think of where is the low point relative to the ball and where is the low point relative to the ground. It's got to be in front of the ball, but underground. That's the key part that so many golfers miss. I can have my low point in front of the ball, I can hit down on the golf ball and completely dead top it. This is the kind of final piece of this jigsaw before I give you that little on-course tip. Lead shoulder, we've already spoken about this lead shoulder. I want you to, with that lead shoulder, make what I call the J move. Okay, so if I was to sort of reference a J, it would look something like this, a capital sort of J. Now it's not going to look exactly like that, but we're going to have that same sort of shape. It's going to go forward and down and then up. So if I use this golf club to reference that, look at these two different movements. I want you to focus on the end of the grip. That does not look like the letter J. And then this one. That maybe does look more like a letter J. Now that second one was over-exaggerated, okay? I'm not expecting you to make that movement. But because it had that sort of down and forwards, what that does is it takes my circle, it moves it forward, which we've already discussed, but it moves it underground. Now we've got this recipe for perfect ball striking. That's how you master the ball striking, is you get your low point target side and underground. So as your lead hip is staying lower and moving forwards, I want your lead shoulder to move lower and forwards. Well, there was definitely a divot. I mean, I probably exaggerated that movement a little bit for the video, but I mean, take a look. I mean, I used a T there, but if I move that T back, that's where the T was, look, here. So you can see that my low point was about here. It was in front of the ball and it was underground. That's how you get perfect ball striking. On the course, we're not all done, I'm afraid. It'd be great if we could just do those drills, then go and play great golf. But for many of you who've got your low point too far back, hitting the ground will always give you poor results. It'll give you those fat shots, those kind of chunky contacts. It'll never feel great. So you'll be sort of programmed to miss the ground. So we can get you into these perfect sort of transitional delivery positions where your low point will be target side of the ball, but this, the important bit, the 6 inches between your ears, might still kick in and say to you, I don't want to hit that ground, and you might start to kind of pull the arms away and basically do whatever you need to do to make sure that club doesn't hit the ground, because you've got a history of it being a poor result. So on the course, all we have to do is just basically preempt what's going to happen. So we know the movements that we're going to try and work, lead hip, lead shoulder, and when you're on the course, you basically have to stand there and say to yourself, it's okay for me to hit the ground. I've got to retrain my brain to say, with my new swing, with my new movement, with my kind of better impact, my club will make contact with the ground. And if you can start to convince yourself that that's going to happen, that's when your ball striking really goes to that next level.